Who was the clone trooper that was brave enough to directly lie to the face of Emperor Palpatine following the events of the Jedi Purge? Why did this clone trooper absolutely hate the Jedi? And why did he gain the begrudging respect of Lord Vader? With Vader saying that he would prove to be an invaluable asset and one of the few clones that he could trust entirely. Greetings, Acolytes of the Force, and welcome back to the Archives. In Legends continuity, the clone trooper's opinion on the Jedi varied drastically. Many of them absolutely adored the Jedi generals, viewing them as their brothers and sisters in arms for the Republic. But there were also a great many clone troopers who perceived themselves as literal slaves to the Republic. Despite what they were bred to do, they were born without their free will, and eventually grew to hate who they perceived to be their Jedi captors. The clone that we'll be discussing today, though, didn't actually hate the Jedi initially, but grew to despise them and view them as weak and cowardly by the end of the war. The clone trooper that we'll be discussing today is CT-5539. Our story begins with 5539 during the Battle of Masum. The clone trooper and his brothers, Red Battalion and Blue Battalion, were engaged in a losing battle with a group of super battle droids. Many of the clones, though, believed in their Jedi general, a young Twi'lek who had recently become a Jedi Master and who was unnamed in the lore. However, as the battle raged on, the Twi'lek became more and more delirious, shocked by just how brutal the Clone Wars had become. In order to end the engagement quickly, the Twi'lek Jedi General ordered a full assault on the battle droids. However, commanders pointed out that there was risk that this could be an ambush. Yet, the Twi'lek was unrelenting and eventually led 2 battalions into a massive explosion, one that the droids had set and had planned the Jedi to fall into. The Jedi General herself was not killed, although many of the clone troopers were, leaving behind CT-5539 as one of the few survivors. The faithful clone trooper hoisted the Jedi General on his shoulders though, determined to not let the Republic officer die, even though so many clones had perished by her mistake. Attempting to retreat back to safety, he ordered what remained of the small battalion to cover fire as she attempted to get her out of the pit. He then ordered the remaining clone troopers to flank him as he attempted to get the general to safety. However, by the time that he finally reached the rendezvous point, he had discovered that the Jedi generals that had been in command had left not only the Twi'lek Jedi, but the entire battalion for dead, deeming it a complete and utter lost cause. As the Jedi General died in his arms and his clone trooper brethren were mowed down by the super battle droids around him, CT-5539 was left alone, his bravery met with abandonment. 8 days after he was abandoned though, he was attacked by wild creatures of the world, him being the sole survivor. However, the clone trooper had had something unique happen to him. He had gone utterly insane from the combat. He had become an animal himself, as he claimed, adopting the official name of Hawk. He had become a brutal warrior and threw away his designation as a clone. Every wild creature that attacked him that day would die by his hand, brutally butchering every single one of them. His fate was no longer in the hands of the Jedi or even other clones. He was his own man now, a creature of death. Eventually, he would be located by a group of farmers on the world that had built a small outpost for themselves and would peacefully join them and work among them for 2 years. 2 years when the Clone Wars would officially come to an end and the Galactic Empire would rise in place of the Grand Army of the Republic. During his time on the world though, they eventually heard word of another Grand Warrior, an individual clad in black armor that was said to be unstoppable and was directly responsible for the butchering of nearly 24 Jedi. The farmers listening to the holotapes called this warrior the greatest that the galaxy had ever seen. A new savior, a man come to liberate the galaxy from the tyranny of the Jedi. It would be here that Hawk promised that he would find this man, this great general of an empire, and pledge his allegiance solely to him. Enlisting himself in the Stormtrooper Corps, he would eventually come face to face with this Lord Vader, desperate to serve under him. During one of their missions together, Hawk realized that his commanding officer was going to make a brutal mistake as he had flashbacks to the Jedi Twi'lek General. Begging his commanding officer to stop as there was a trap ahead, the officer threatened to have him murdered and killed for insubordination, hung publicly. But the loyal clone trooper that Hawk had once been was long dead. He took control of an AT-AT walker and brutally murdered his commanding officer, attempting to stop the forward assault from continuing. However, he again was too late, and the entire stormtrooper battalion was killed before his eyes, leaving him again the lone survivor. Following this though, something shocking happened. He was informed that he was going to have an audience with Emperor Palpatine directly, as he was the one held responsible for this terrible defeat. The clone trooper would eventually be brought before the Emperor and would lie directly to his face about the situation that had occurred, not telling Palpatine that he had been the one to shoot on the commanding officer first. Darth Vader was also present there, and he could sense that Hawk was lying. But Vader admired Hawk for showing boldness in the face of Emperor Palpatine directly, and after the meeting, mentioned that he needed somebody that he could trust completely by his side. Hawk would proceed to join Vader on various missions after this point, and his respect for the Dark Lord rapidly increased after seeing him firsthand. Vader was completely dedicated to killing the Jedi and the enemies of the Empire, and Hawk had found himself a fellow warrior that he could tie his fate to. On one occasion, Hawk would be behind enemy lines with Lord Vader, and it would be here where he would come face to face with himself, another clone trooper who had joined the rebellion. As the two were alone, they would end up having a brutal fistfight after neither would concede to the other. As the battlefield was set, Vader and the Imperial forces began to approach. Darth Vader, though, halted their advance, and neither side fired a single shot, as Vader watched the clone brethren bludgeon each other for their respective duties. Hawk would come out on top of this the victor through sheer grit alone, and Vader would do something shocking. He would extend out his own hand, helping Hawk off of the ground as a show of respect for his loyalty, something that no other direct trooper had done under the command of Vader, perhaps reminding him of his time as Anakin Skywalker and the loyalty that the clones had shown him then. But this loyalty would soon crumble. After the Empire took a nearby rebel base, Darth Vader would go on a brutal massacre, as Hawk would realize the truth of the individual that he had tied his fate to. Vader would not stop at murdering the rebels that pointed blasters at him, but he would then pursue their families, their children, brutally ripping apart the wounded with his gifts of the Force and his lightsaber. No one was safe from the Dark Lord's wrath, and the truth was revealed to Hawk. Hawk would see one final medical tent and burst in before the Dark Lord, attempting to make a grand speech and telling all of them that Darth Vader was now their new lord, telling all of the wounded rebels that remained that Darth Vader was now their ultimate master. Darth Vader was shocked by this initiative, but was also curious and let it play out as he too entered the camp. Instead of bowing to their new master though, every single wounded rebel stood, refusing to give themselves over to the Empire and over to Vader. Secretly, the Dark Lord was pleased, as he again activated his lightsaber, severing heads and limbs, running through them like they were nothing. Hawk once more screamed out in pain, begging the Dark Lord to stop this brutal massacre. Surprisingly, Vader would stop directly in his tracks and looked over at the clone, meeting his eyes directly. Hawk saw for the first time the true evil that was Darth Vader. There was nothing noble, there was nothing grand about this warrior. This was the embodiment of the dark side, and this is not what Hawk believed in. Running from the rebel camp that day, Hawk would eventually defect from the Empire, and Lord Vader would not pursue him, wanting the clone trooper to be haunted by the memory of this demon. From that day on, Hawk lived in solitude, haunted by endless nightmares of what he had done and what he had seen that night. And that, my friends, is the tale of the clone trooper that was brave enough to lie to Emperor Palpatine, how he swore his allegiance to Lord Vader, and how he learned that this was the greatest mistake of his life. But anyway, friends, what are your thoughts on the clone trooper Hawk? Had you heard of this story before? And does this serve to you as a brutal reminder of the terror of what Darth Vader truly was? Thank you so much for visiting the archives today, my friends, and may the Force be with you.